Is fire safety. So I'd like to invite officers to come up to the table. Okay, thank you all for joining us this evening for what is a very important topic. And so, starting with Dave, if you just go down the line and introduce yourselves to the camera, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm Dave Markham, Director of Asset Management.
Paul Langford, Director of Resident Services.
David Ickbom, Area Manager from Resident Services.
Tony Hunter, Head of Engineering.
Jo Wilson, Supported Pathways Manager.
Okay, so it'd be useful if you just talk us through the report just for a few minutes, just to give us an overview before we kick off with some questions.
So very quickly then, I'll talk through the structure of the report. The first bit I'd like to mention is some really exciting work done by the Resident Fire Safety Scrutiny panel. They produced a report which reported back in November. So what I've included here is initial draft response to that report. We have to qualify that it is very draft because we have to have a conversation with the panel themselves. And the understanding is that this will be going to Tenants' Council next, 19th of February, I believe the date. Second part of the report covers our response to the BB7 report on fire risk management. There are principally three recommendations in that. Well, lots of recommendations, but a lot of them about establishing a documented fire risk management system. So you'll notice in the appendix that a lot of our responses are, yes, we'll do that. We've included also as an appendix a communications plan. I think the key finding from the residents panel and commentary from a lot of people is the need for us to improve our communications, partly around the reasoning behind the stay put policy and partly around the explanations for the zero tolerance approach to common areas and gates and grills. And then there's some little bits and pieces about LEDP, which you've just heard from Mike on. Some of the report, some update on a number of the recommendations that went through overview and scrutiny. And I've included some, but the bulk of the report is about the regulatory requirements about the management of common areas and the reasoning behind our approach to be our more robust approach towards tackling those issues.
So thank you for that. Just on that, so one of the reasons I think Rosie asked to bring this in, and she'll be speaking in just a sec, but was, we sat here when the fire commander came, and he was, completely in agreement with that. It was unequivocal on that, I feel. But there was, we felt some issues around consistency across the different estates in terms of how communal areas have been handled, and it had led to some tension between residents and their local officers who, in areas where perhaps they've been treated, more harshly, or the more comprehensive clean-ups have been done quicker than in other areas. And we'd heard anecdotal stories about certain wards, certain estates where people felt that that it came quite quick, or that they perhaps weren't completely aware of what was going on. That's not to say they weren't told, that they weren't consulted, but did you see those? Have you seen that a difference in terms of the level of complaint from any residents who might have complained about stuff being cleared? And if so, how do we just ensure that the policy is carried out the same across the borough? I'm keen for that to be in a way that's the safest possible, regardless of where it is. I think some places in Camberwell perhaps weren't weren't as quick as some of the ones in the north, where I think more complaints came in. So just some thoughts on whether you feel that's now at a level across, or whether there's more work to be done.
So can I start on that?
Yeah.
First thing is that obviously any query that comes through to me or any of the fire safety team, we follow up on that individual inquiry on the basis that it's legitimate, on the basis that there's an issue. And in the report, you'll see that we've quoted the numbers that we've had. There has literally been, as you can imagine, thousands of actions being taken across Southwark. Bearing in mind we have 174 blocks over 6 stories. We also have other blocks under 6 stories. So there are literally thousands across the piece, and as you can see, so far today we've had 15 formal complaints and 20 member inquiries. That's not to say there hasn't been other issues where residents who've had things in place for 10, 15 years or more have not been disgruntled or upset, by the fact that we are taking a zero tolerance approach to things now. But I think what we have is a very consistent approach, and I'm not going to say that there's never a mistake. I would be the last to say that that things are perfect, but those statistics speak for themselves in terms of the consistency. In fact, there was a query just yesterday that Councillor Crime forwarded to me. I won't go into the detail of it, obviously, but it was a resident that was raising an issue about communication. We checked up on it, and within an hour we'd got an answer back, appending 3 letters that had gone to the resident. A communication on the very day, actually. It was a grill removal, explaining how it would be done, the secure door would be checked, new locks would be fitted. So please appreciate, as I'm sure you do, that sometimes things are raised and they're not always as they seem. But as I say, every single inquiry is followed through to the letter to ensure that we've got that consistent, and we'll continue to do that. I mean, as you can see from the FRA actions that have been raised, we initially introduced, when our colleagues in fire safety asked us to do this on a kind of across the board, because they set the policy and we do our best to enforce it, weekly inspections. Yeah. We've recently reverted back to 2 weekly inspections on the basis that and I think our fire safety manager Dave Rowson might be better to talk about this because he was present, on the basis that the LFB recently did a walk around our estates, and I think they commented saying that they were some of the best they've seen in London, anywhere actually, in terms of how they're being managed. So we've relaxed that back to 2 weeks. But obviously, just before this meeting started, Dave sent me some photographs of some, unfortunately, of more things that have been left out in the wrong place. So it's a constant situation that we have to try and keep on top of and educate people. I don't know if Dave, you want to add anything in terms of the LFB bit.
I just think we have constant communication with the LFB. We have a very, very good close working relationship, as you would have gathered from the last meeting you had with the Borough Commander here. We work very closely with the operational crews that go out on fire calls. We work very closely with regulatory fire safety. We work very closely with fire engineering at fire brigade, and we also work very closely with policy. And we're only as good as our last fire, so we don't rest on our laurels, but we are being looked at as a big borough at the moment, but there's still a lot of room for improvement.
Thank you. I'm going to move over.
Thank you, and thank you very much all for being here and for the kind of draft overview of the report. I think Tom set out pretty well some of the primary concerns that we have heard about this at previous meetings, which obviously prompted us asking you to come here today. But obviously, aside from the kind of general points about communication and kind of unequal implementation across the borough, we also obviously heard some really serious concerns from people, particularly who have particular concerns about kind of crime and antisocial behaviour in and around their homes. Obviously, this is particularly with view to the removal of security gates. Obviously, I appreciate what you're saying about everything you've been doing to try and improve communication about the policy more widely. But I wondered if there's anything you can tell us about any work you've been able to do, particularly with residents who've expressed those very serious concerns, to reassure them and I suppose also to work with them to ensure that, you know, where the grills have to be removed, that their properties are, you know, secure and they're made to feel safe in them in other ways.
Okay, Tony might add something to this as well, but we won't remove grills until we're in a position that the residents have a secure door. So,
security door.
Yeah.
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 And that's the same door was put on as new. And so some grills won't be removed because they're about 6 weeks leading for those doors. So we have to work very closely with our resident services colleagues about setting those up, because the day we remove that grill, we have to fix the door. So there's a process to it. So we won't remove that until that's all in place. And we have a budget for that. So we have committed we would do that unless we have those doors to install. So we think we're given a very secure environment when those grills are removed.
That's great. I mean, that was actually going to be my follow-up question, was about those doors and whether that was still definitely the policy, that until they were available, then the grills wouldn't be removed.
Well, I think it's we assess the door that's behind the grill first, because the doors may already have the stipulated requirement we have for our security. So we'd assess first, and it may be that door is sufficient. So that's assessed first, and then we make the decision about if we put a new one on or not.
And then can I ask specifically with regards to that position of the secure doors, I mean, do you feel that has been kind of effectively communicated to residents, and what's the kind of response that you've had back when people have raised concerns about security and you've explained about these new doors? Has that seemed to kind of allay most people's concerns, or you know, do you feel like that's been a kind of a more positive dialogue and the communication's been effective?
Our experiences, and again, you know, rather than just me talk to you about it, I think some of the statistics begin to bear that out, is that the majority of people understand. Of course there's concerns, but when we reassure them around this and we explain the reasons why, and colleagues who can unfortunately recount instances where grills have become a problem in fires, explain the alternative and the consequences, that can, you know, it's unfortunate, but that can bring things into a very stark reality in terms of what the alternative is. So that's not me saying there's never a question, never a query, never a concern, but that can, you know, that we will fit it, we'll ensure that it's the right standard, and we will do it at the point at which the grill is removed. You know, he's reassuring people in the vast majority of cases.
Thank you.
James and Martin and Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick word on the sort of the fire safety staff, I guess. I mean, I've met Dave Rosen a couple of times on some of the visits to TRAs, which I'm pleased to see are now at an end. That's a good development. I mean, I think some of the statistics that Paul quoted are fantastic, and I think that's a real success story. And a big part of that, you know, there has to be a huge amount of credit to go to the staff for achieving these figures. But kind of in the context of what was obviously a huge sort of increase in resident concern after Grenfell, and the amount of additional work that came in, so you had the sort of additional stresses that must have been experienced by the staff working directly on this. You know, at the same time, I'm sure there was a kind of a pull factor from external bodies that, you know, could recruit people with this kind of expertise. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about where we are now with the staffing levels and the kind of match between the supply demand for Southwark staff.
I think you're absolutely right. The initial aftermath of Grenfell led to huge amounts of work, not just for the fire safety team, but across the department. We immediately set about reassessing all our 174 blocks, 7-storey and above, publishing our FRAs. Paul's team increased the amount of inspections. We created a fire safety concerns inbox, which, as you could imagine, for that first few weeks was an incredibly busy place, and it still receives concerns today. And yes, the external pressures, I can tell you, Dave can tell you even more how many phone calls he might have got trying to tempt him to other providers, as did the team. received lots of offers, come and join us, because, as Dave said, I don't want to be boasting or sound like I'm boasting, but we have a highly regarded fire safety team, not only by the local fire brigade but by other housing providers. So yes, they were in demand, and we had to find ways in which we could encourage them to stay. CPD, some look at the remuneration and encourage them to stay longer. Pleased to say, I think, Dave, I'm right in saying only one fire safety surveyor left, and largely the team has remained much the same since Grenfell, and I'm really pleased that Dave has stayed as well. So.
Again, I would echo those compliments. I think that's absolutely right. Just a question, and I know it's come up meeting with, but I've also been at, and they've been present, the plant pots. So you're on the ground floor, and you have two plant pots on either side of your main entrance door. They're only 6 inches tall, a nice running plant. Now, I have locals who've been told they've got to be removed. Okay. Now, we all want zero tolerance, but I'm having difficulty realising the fire hazardousness of a plant pot, which is 6 inches by 6 inches, with a nice, pretty plant on either side of an entrance door. Okay. And can someone therefore tell me what is a fire obstruction? Okay. And why would these plant pots be a fire obstruction?
Okay.
I'm going to defer to the
situation we spoke about on the ground floor.
Yeah.
If it's not a common area, it doesn't apply. That's a private garden, it doesn't apply. It's the common areas. It's the regulatory fire safety order, which we work under, applies to the common areas. So the common areas are also our scope limits. So it's where the areas are used by more than one person to make their way out of the building should there be an emergency or a fire. It's those areas that we cover. So if we are differentiating between private gardens and common areas, the answer is simple. Plant pots must come away from the common areas, not from private gardens. Does that make sense?
We, of course, as local politicians, need to translate it so our electorate, or indeed our tenants, can understand what you just said. Yeah. So I'm just going to restart back to you to make sure I've understood what you said. So where a plant pot is near a fire exit, clearly that's out of bounds. Okay. But I've given the example I cited was sort of the ground floor.
Yes.
There's 6 inches by 6 inches. You've got pretty plants coming out of them. Okay. And I express incredulousness that it's a fire hazard, and of course the family concerned who are trying to give fire where they live are frustrated because they can't convince experts like yourself that this surely cannot be a fire hazard. So again, if you could maybe just simplify it for someone like myself, what you just said, is to explain how we can explain to a tenant who's been told they've got to remove these plant pots. Okay.
I'll come back to you again, say exactly the same thing, and I'll elaborate on it.
Thank you.
If it is in a common area, which is an escape route, the zero tolerance applies. If it is a flat and it's only in the garden, where it's not a common area, that policy does not apply. Does that make that quite clear in terms of explaining that back to a resident?
The ground floor?
If the ground floor is a common area.
Okay, so that's a common area.
It's not an area shared by other residents to make their way out of the building.
Right, okay.
So if it's not a common area, it doesn't apply. It doesn't come under the regulations, under the statutory requirements and regulations of the RRO. Common areas it applies to.
I know there are some in the religious camp who interpret the central book quite literally, okay, and others who simply interpret it, and apply a common sense approach. Surely those plant pots are not an obstruction. I heard what you said. That's the literal reciting of the regulations, but can we not relax it? Okay.
if I may, if we're talking about common areas,
Okay.
and we're talking about plant pots,
Yeah.
we're talking about mats are another thing that come up quite a lot. We're talking about pictures, we're talking about a large number of things. If you go over the risk assessments for the last 12 months to 18 months, you will see the large number of combustibles and obstructions that we've had in those areas. They haven't been the odd thing here and there, that it has been widespread. It has been so widespread that we have had to create thousands of tasks. That has become so serious because we attempted a managed approach for a number of years and it clearly failed. When you have a fire, and it's unfortunate that we do have a number of fires, if that fire gets into the common area, and it doesn't matter whether it's an enclosed area or whether it's an open balcony, because if you have the right weather conditions, smoke can stay in an open balcony, the vision's obscured, and as soon as you get down below 5 metres vision, tenability becomes an issue for residents. Now, many residents are supposed to apply the stay put, and since the Grenfell incident, many residents won't apply that stay put, they will come out of their building. So what they will do in turn is they will come into an area potentially that's affected by a fire. I've got a number of combustibles and a number of hazards which might trip them, particularly if there is obscured and smoking. if I've got a nice individual like yourself, councillor, who can hold their breath for quite some time, that's not a problem. If I've got an individual that's got a disability or a child or older, it becomes magnified and becomes greater. So the travel distances that you can go through during fire are much less significant for those with those issues that I just mentioned just now. And so the only way we can guarantee that that area is safe for our residents, and this is about safety for our residents, and not only safety for our residents but for firefighters coming in, is that we do remove those items that firstly can burn, and secondly that those that can be not become a trip hazard for those individuals as well. Now, it may seem that to some people, if you drill down, that some of those issues may seem a little bit, as you mentioned earlier, a little bit over the top. But if we'd approached the managed approach, and we've managed to enforce that managed approach, and residents had listened to that managed approach advice that we tried to put in place for a number of years, we wouldn't be sitting here now discussing this issue. The big thing for me is statistics. And since we've put this policy in place in the last 6 months, we've not had a single fire in our common area. We have had quite a large number of fires in our common areas up to that point. I couldn't give you numbers offhand, but we have. We haven't had any in the last 6 months. Now, for me, that's fantastic. It means that if I don't have a fire in my common area, should we have a fire anywhere in any of our blocks, our residents can get out. And that, for me, is the important thing. Now, we go back to our little pots that you were talking about earlier. It falls over, somebody trips over. If somebody gets injured or doesn't make it out, they go to hospital. If anyone goes to hospital, the culpability lies with the council. It's us that's responsible for everything that goes on in that block. We're responsible person in that common area. We have a duty, I have a duty, to make sure that those individuals are safe. And if that means sometimes, unfortunately, upsetting some people, which I don't like to do because I do appreciate there are personal belongings there that belong to people that they cherish, and they really do cherish, I really get that. But if it means that my residents are going to stay safe in that building, I'm a very happy man. And I'm always happy to look at individual cases, as you cited earlier, where there may be confusion regarding the placement of pots, where it may not be a common area. In fact, I've spoken to a lot of resident service officers where we've had that discussion, and we have come back from what they believe to be the case. So we look at things on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
We'll continue to look at things on a case-by-case basis. But fundamentally, I think the general approach is right. It's the right approach, and it's proven to be safe so far for the residents, which I think is the most important thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, similar-ish question. It's obviously there's various kind of variables here, and I'm interested in the practical differences between the managed approach versus the zero tolerance approach. And actually, that explanation was very helpful in terms of the managed approach is not working. And I don't know. I know that Councillor Cryan has promised us the review, which is going to report at some point, and maybe this will all be part of it. But if you're visiting properties every week at the moment, or now going to every fortnight for a zero tolerance approach, is that actually taking up any less time than you would for a managed approach? Also visiting those properties and assessing, where there was a higher risk or where there was a lower risk. Do we have data on, like you say, number of fires where you have a managed approach versus a zero tolerance approach? Are these the kind of things that are going to be part of the review? Do we have that data? Because I think it may. It would certainly reassure me, and it may be useful for residents as well. Because I do have concerns about the zero tolerance approach, because instinctively that seems quite a hard thing to enforce. Because originally you only had letters going to residents who had the plant pots, not their neighbours who didn't, and they may go out and buy a plant pot the next day, for example. Now I understand all those residents are getting those letters, but also you have a lot of churn, you have new residents moving in, so obviously there is resources required for a zero tolerance approach as well. Does that make sense?
I think it does. Just before we talk about one approach versus the other, paragraph 37 in the report does set out the terms of reference for the review of the zero tolerance approach. Dave, again, I'll defer to you on this, but in my view, I think initially zero tolerance might create a lot of work, but ultimately that reduces. Whereas a managed approach is a constant piece of work that doesn't necessarily reduce.
Sorry, may I also add to that? Prior to coming here, I was in the fire brigade for 30 years, and 8 years of that was in regulatory fire safety. And I dealt with a lot of housing providers, and many of them tried to use the managed approach. In my experience, dealing with a large number of housing providers, it didn't work in any of the instances. I'd also say that there is, since Grenfell, and let's be honest, Grenfell has been a bit of a game changer for a lot of housing providers. More housing providers now are going down this approach of zero tolerance because it is easier to manage. So I don't know if statistically I could sit here and make an argument to say that there is a big difference. I think there is. I think there is, because if you have nothing to burn or nothing to fall over in a common area, you're not going to have a fire and you're not going to have people injured. I will say to you that in my experience, the managed approach hasn't worked in probably 15 to 20 housing providers I've worked with previously. I don't believe it was working at Southwark Council. That is borne out by the numbers of tasks that were being laid out by the risk assessments, and those are what we are accountable to the enforcing authority of the London Fire Brigade. If we were to have a fire in a building where the risk assessment has asked for the removal of things, and it's those items that have caught fire, or there's been a fire in that building with any other items that come out, we as the council are culpable in the eyes of law. So again, I can only give personal opinions. I can't give you facts alone. It is a far safer approach, and it is, and I think as Tony said, in the long term, it is much easier to manage too.
I'll just give you an example on Ledbury. Yeah, it's not a 2 week. We're out every 3 hours. Yeah, in a block where people are very aware of fire safety. Yeah, we're knocking on doors. You've left a rubbish bag in the communal area. We're knocking on doors. There's a bike there. There's a pram there, and we're having to confiscate them. You go to the back of the office. It's where we keep the stuff overnight, where people have left it outside the door as obstacles, and so you're in a real situation where everyone's really aware of the situation of zero tolerance and what fire risks are at Ledbury, and people are still doing it.
Any more questions? No? Okay, thank you very much. That's been a really fascinating and enlightening discussion.